Hi there, and welcome to BitKnits. I'm Marlise, and this is another Monday Mystery Makes video. I've curated 14 free patterns off the internet, put them into an online spinning wheel, a random picker, and each week we spin the wheel to find out what mystery free pattern we're going to be making for that week. We've already made tops, shawls, a very functional plant hanger, a sun hat, and last week we made a crochet amigurumi whale, which was super cute and super easy. So we're going to head on over to the computer. I'm going to spin the wheel and let's see what this week's mystery make will be. This is always the most fun part for me, is picking these random patterns, seeing what we're going to be getting. What do we have left? I've taken out all of the previous possibilities that we've already made. We have a boho top, some fruit slice keychains, a crochet shawl, a bee, which is another amigurumi, hopefully simple pattern. We have some socks, hanger cover, a market bag, a placemat, and a trivet. And these are all crochet patterns, although I would like to expand this out and do a knitting version as well sometime, but that is for another time in the future. Let's get right on with this. Spin the wheel and see what this magic random picker has for us this week. The Canyonlands Boho Top. This is a lace boho crochet top. It's a free pattern by Make and Do Crew. It looks like you can also get a printable PDF. Here is a quick look at it, and free pattern and tutorial. So this is what we're going to be making today, or this week, I should say. So it's a makeanddocrew.com, and it is the Canyonlands Boho crochet top. I'm gonna go pick some yarn. We'll take a look at this pattern, pick some yarn, grab my hook, and we'll have a go at this one. It says we need a light 3-weight cotton yarn. It recommends Cotton Bamboo by Lion Brand. I will also need a 4 and a 5mm crochet hook. It says I will need 3, 5, or 6 skeins depending on the size that I'm going to be making. So I'm going to go see what I have in my stash, pick some yarn, and I'm hoping that I can get this done within the week. I've picked some yarn. I am going to go with the Karen Painterly Cakes. I know this is a 4-weight. It is a 4-weight yarn. However, it is a little bit thinner than your typical 4-weight yarn. The pattern recommends a 3-weight yarn. I looked up the exact yarn that it recommends, and they come in like 230 or so yards, maybe 260, something like that. All of my 3-weight cotton yarn that I have, I only have like 160 yards per ball. I am not confident that I have enough of that in one color, and I don't necessarily want to purposefully stripe it with all of the different colors that I do have. I'd rather just use something like this where I don't have a lot of ends to weave in at the end. I think this will work up fine. It's what I'm going to use anyway. I have 2 of these. There's 480 odd yards in one of these. I should have plenty with 2 cakes. So this is what we're going to use. I'm going to go grab my hooks and get started on this top. an update on this top. I've made one entire back panel or front panel. The pattern says you make two exactly the same. You work up so many rows depending on the size that you're making, and then you start adding some length on either side for the sleeves. I changed up the pattern just a little bit because it says to start a chain with a new ball of yarn, and I didn't want to do that. So what you're supposed to do is start this chain and then leave it on the side. So when you come and start doing the sleeves, on one end, you chain wherever that last row was, you chain over so many, and then start working the pattern back along that chain, along your last row, until you get over here, which is where you would work across the separate chain that you've made. I didn't want to do that. So what I did, instead of having a separate chain from a separate ball of yarn sitting over there, I worked a chain on the row before you start the sleeves. On this side, I just worked a chain and I slip stitched across. And you can see it's a little bit thicker right here. I slip stitched across and then I started working that row. And when I got here, you chain X amount of chains depending on the size. And then you start your next row right on top of that chain all the way back across. And then I worked on the chain that I had done and slip stitched back into. So that meant I didn't have to tie in another ball of yarn or cut my yarn or any of that. And I think that worked out really well. I'm happy with the colorway. It's working up really nice. It's a really nice pattern. It is a 4-row repeat, and I do find that I have to have the pattern open so I can see it. Even though my brain does kind of understand the main pattern, it's those beginning and ending of each row that are just different enough that if you don't get it right, you're going to mess up the pattern going forward on the next row. I have started the second panel, and I did not start with a new ball. I'm just continuing with what I had left. You can see at the top of this one, I ended with sort of that yellow orangish color. And so it was a perfect place to start that new panel at the bottom because it'll match up almost perfectly. So I've worked the number of rows that I need before I start the sleeves. We're going to start the sleeves, work the rest of the pattern. There is an edging, I believe, on the bottom. You seam up the two sides and then work around the neckline once, maybe twice, just to finish it off. I might also do that on the sleeves as well. We'll see when we get there. This is all the yarn that I have left from that first ball, and I've got one full second cake of this yarn, so I will have plenty of yarn for this, but so far, really, really loving how it's looking. It's finished. This was somewhat of a labor of love. However, the pattern is really not complicated, and just look at those stitches. The fan stitch, absolutely beautiful. And now I've got a new top to wear. I did make a size small/medium, so I did the smallest size, and it came out quite big actually. I did use the recommended hook sizes. I used a 4-weight Karen cotton painterly cakes. For this, I had 2 cakes of this. I used an entire cake plus whatever's left here. So there's about 481 yards in each of these. So I used 481 yards plus maybe an extra 150 maybe. So if you're going to make this, you probably need at least 600 yards of yarn for the small / medium size. I was a little bit concerned with how the striping was going to work up, but I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Could not be happier with how this whole thing was constructed. It was a really hectic week for me last week. I got started on this right away as soon as that wheel spun and picked this pattern, and I worked about half of the front panel. So the shirt is constructed by making 2 panels, the front and the back. They're exactly the same. And then you just seam up the sides and the shoulder seams. You wind up doing a single crochet around the neckline and on the bottom. I decided not to do anything around the sleeves. I think it's fine just the way it is, but you could totally add a single crochet around the sleeves if you wanted to. So I finished half of a panel very quickly, less than a day, just a couple of hours. And then life got crazy and I was unable to pick this back up until probably Saturday. So I had to work the entire back panel plus finish the front panel before today, which is Monday, and it was totally doable. So this shirt in total took probably 2 to 3 days, and that's just kind of working it as I had time. I didn't sit and work straight through. The fan stitch, super easy. However, because it is a 4-row repeat, so you're repeating rows 2, 3, 4, and 5, I had to keep that pattern up and open on my computer as I was working it, just because of the way certain rows are started and finished. And I wanted to make sure that I did them correctly so that the pattern would continue to work up in the right way. Other than that, it's really simple. Now in the pattern, let me show you a little bit closer. These fan stitches are supposed to have 2 chains in between each treble crochet to create those fans. I only worked 1 chain in between them. I just felt like it gave it a more close fan stitch. It wasn't quite as open because you do have these open spaces here where you're working in the fan into those spaces. And so those are already creating the openness of this piece. I decided to just work the 1 chain in between each of those treble crochets. And that is another thing with this pattern. There are treble crochets when you create the fans. There's treble crochets on the ends. There's a lot of treble crochets. That is one of my least favorite stitches just because it takes a little bit longer, and it definitely did slow me up on this a little bit. However, this yarn was a dream to work with. It didn't split on me. It just kind of slid off the hook. It was fantastic. So if you're going to try this, I do recommend this yarn. It works up fine. You might get a little bit of a bigger size than what the gauge is in the pattern. Because like I said, I made a small/medium, and I think if I were to have made a large, it just would have been huge. And then the other thing that I changed in this pattern was the way that the sleeves are constructed. So I talked about this a little bit as I was working it up over the weekend. But what you're supposed to do is you work the bottom so many rows and then you stop. You bring in a new ball of yarn for the only purpose to create chains on one end. So for example, you would bring in and chain, I think it was like 16 or 17 chains, and then stop, and then pick up where you left off on the other side, and you would chain whatever amount the pattern says, and then you start working the pattern back across those chains, across the main portion of the shirt that you already have started working up, and then you would pick up that secondary set of chains that you used a new ball of yarn for, and then continue the pattern till the end of that chain. I decided I didn't want to do all of that, especially because with this color changing yarn, I didn't want to mess up the colors. And that was really my main reason for not doing exactly what the pattern said, is because I wasn't using all one color. I didn't want to pick up a color from a different cake and have it be a totally different color than what I was already working on as I was working up the panels. So what I did was, on the row before you're supposed to chain, I ended with that chain, and then I slip stitched back so it was already ready to go when I started doing the next row for the sleeves. Hopefully that makes sense. If you look at the pattern, you'll probably be able to understand what I'm trying to explain, what I did. It worked really well for me. The only difference is that because I slip stitched across that initial chain, that part of the sleeve, and I don't even know which side it is now because they get joined together, the two panels, but it's just a little bit thicker than if you were to use a chain without the slip stitching back. But again, it's under the arms, you can't see it, and it's really not noticeable at all once you join and seam everything together. So I do recommend doing that if you don't want to bring in another ball of yarn. If you're using something like the self-striping yarn, it is very helpful to just keep that colorway going as you're working those panels. And that is really about it. I did create a smaller neckline than what the pattern, it looked like the pattern has, but that is completely just a personal preference. I don't think the pattern actually says how far up to seam. It's just kind of how it fits on you. I did it, I think 3 fans in. I tried it on, it was still very loose around the neck, and if that's kind of the feel that I was going for, I would have totally kept it that way, but I wanted to make sure that it was going to stay up on my shoulders a little bit better, so I went in another few fans, and I still have a very wide neckline. I'm really happy with it. Would I make this pattern again? Absolutely, yes, I would. I highly recommend this pattern. It took me a little bit to figure out, to read through, but it's a very well-written pattern, and despite all of the treble crochets and all of the fans, it does work up very quickly. I was surprised as I was working up the second panel on Saturday/Sunday, so yesterday, because I was nervous that I was not going to be able to complete this mystery pattern in 1 week. I was very surprised at how fast that second panel worked up when that was the only thing I was working on. So very happy with it. Love the final overall look of it. It's very flowy. It's cool for the summer, hot summer weather. So give this one a try if you haven't seen it yet. I think you will really enjoy making it and wearing it. And with that, it is time to pick our next mystery pattern for this coming week. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next Monday to show you what our mystery pattern is. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye.